Hi guys, and welcome to Piano and Keyboard Artist, where we discuss the artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And as part of my ongoing series, the Depeche Mode album review series, today we're talking about Some Great Reward. This is part one of the Some Great Reward album review. I've decided to break it into two parts as I did with the Construction Time Again series. And in this first segment, I'm going to be talking about some general aspects to the album. I also want to cover the gear that was used in the production, some of the production techniques, and then I want to talk about the vocals and sort of like the general vibe and the production and the sound of the record. Depeche Mode's Some Great Reward was released on the 24th of September 1984 and was Depeche Mode's fourth studio album. The recording and production of this album took place between January and August of 1984, and it was once again released under Mute Records, produced by Depeche Mode and Daniel Miller, and the engineer once again was Gareth Jones. So it was the same team that did Construction Time Again, and I always talk about how I love the Gareth Jones trilogy, the Construction Time Again, Some Great Reward and Black Celebration. It's interesting with Depeche Mode, they don't ever carry on a formula. With a lot of bands or businesses, usually the safe thing to do is when you stumble across a formula that works, like the saying goes, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. You don't change it. But Depeche Mode were always out to change things and mix things up a bit. After the success of Construction Time Again and then Some Great Reward, Black Celebration, we're jumping the gun a bit, but they changed the production team once again. But I have to give respect to Depeche Mode for always making those risky moves and, going beyond their comfort zone. And, sometimes it pisses the fans off, like especially in recent years. But I do, as I say, have a lot of respect for them, how they would take calculated risks, to sort of push the frontiers of their music and their artistry. Right, so it's 1984, and if we just backtrack a little bit, going back to 1981 when they released their debut album, which was Speak and Spell. Just before it was released, Vince Clarke decided, cheers boys, I'm out of the band, which meant Martin Gore had to take the reins as the songwriter. And in 1982 they released A Broken Frame, and at the same time Alan Wilder joined the band, but of course he wasn't involved in the production of A Broken Frame because he was just meant to be a session muso. Construction Time Again comes along, and now Alan Wilder is officially part of the band and he was involved in the production, which was a good thing. And 1984, it's time to up the ante and release the next studio album. So it did make sense to use the same team. Once again, we see Brian Griffin as the photographer and Gareth Jones once again as the engineer. Now, obviously, prior to Construction Time Again, Depeche Mode were very conscious of the fact that they weren't being taken seriously. They were good-looking, pretty boys, and it was pop. Hey, you're such a pretty boy. Back on topic. They were young, pretty boys, and there was definitely a pop scene, so I think the sort of credible, serious music genres and outlets probably didn't take them serious, and I don't think anyone thought they would last beyond the second album. And by the time they got to Construction Time Again, there was a definite desire to show the world that they were a lot more than a pretty-faced, cheesy pop band, which I never thought they were, but of course people who were anti-Depeche Mode were always anti-Depeche Mode. That, of course, coinciding with Alan Wilder joining the band, who definitely brought an edge to it, and, of course, using Gareth Jones as the engineer and producer. These were just the right moves at the right time. So following the success of Construction Time Again really saw the band pushing the frontiers of not only electronic sound but sampling in a way that had not been sort of heard by the mainstream. Of course, there were Gareth Jones talks about how he worked with sort of like industrial sampling type bands, but they were really underground. And Depeche Mode, in my knowledge, are the first sort of pop band to sort of bring that sort of underground sound and marry it with great pop songs and launch it into the mainstream. And this is definitely where Depeche Mode had the edge, because a lot of this avant-garde, industrial, experimental type, off-the-wall music, a lot of it is not very appealing to the mainstream. You know, it's more underground, or it's more experimental. So it has a very small or a very niche market. But Depeche Mode managed to tap into, although you know, they were never massively commercially successful, like let's say a band like Oasis or something like that. They definitely did manage to get into the charts, and this was all down to not only good management from the side of Daniel Miller, but also great songwriting and great production. I think once Construction Time Again came out, people kind of thought, okay, we're going to just stop criticizing them. Of course, there will always be those who hate what you do. But I think there were a lot of people that went, okay, this is quite serious. And my friends, by the time this came out, I think the haters had to shut up, because this really, and I'm sure if you've been a Depeche Mode fan from the beginning, this is to me one of their best albums. Once again, this is just pure Mode genius. This is where all the parts came together. They took the formula which they kind of cultivated in Construction Time Again, and it all came together. And this coinciding quite naturally with Martin Gore living in Berlin for a while, Martin getting into the S&M scene, Martin, you pervert. And this is really the sort of, Construction Time Again was kind of like the start of Depeche Mode, but this to me was really like the birth of the sort of, you know, when we get to Black Celebration, that's kind of like the quintessential Depeche Mode album, where Martin said since they made Black Celebration, he felt there was a thread running through it for every album after that. But this really was where they kind of went, hey guys, hey world, look at us, we're here, and this is what we do. Now, there is understandably a lot we can talk about on this, and that is why I've broken this video series up into 2 parts. And of course, beyond that, I would like to later on focus on individual songs. For instance, songs like People Are People, which to me is groundbreaking, even by today's standards. If you look at, you've got to remember, and I keep saying, when I really look at these albums from the perspective of not only a fan, but as a producer, and understanding what technology was available to them at the time, I mean, this is a work of genius. It absolutely is. Depeche Mode released 4 singles of this album, which were People Are People, Master and Servant, Blasphemous Rumours, and Somebody. And as I say, this did really make the world sit up and go, okay, you know, whether you loved them or loathed them, you had to say, okay, this is their 4th album, they're going from strength to strength, they're not going away, and they are definitely getting stronger. And with Martin's song, you know, Martin living in Berlin at the time, it did definitely influence him. You know, he got into the whole S&M scene, Martin, you pervert. And this is really where the sort of the sexual, the real sort of like sexiness came into it. I think with Construction Time Again, it was more sort of like environmental issues, and, you know, I don't care if you're going nowhere, just take good care of the world, which is very relevant to the world at the moment, you know, with climate change and everything. But once we get to Some Great Rewards, songs like Is There Something to Do? Is There Something to Do? Grey Sky Over a Black Town, I Can Feel Depression All Around. This really tapped into teenage angst, and I think with the Grey Sky Over a Black Town, perhaps Martin Gore was referring to living in Basildon, you know, as a teenager. Great, you know, this really did hit home with teenagers and frustration and sexual frustration and angst and religion, and it was indeed the perfect album at the perfect time. Just looking, Master and Servant, domination's the name of the game, in bed or in life, they're all just the same. Once again, that's very relevant. It was relevant then, and it's very relevant to today. It's the time-old story of humanity, of master and servant, and, you know, human beings treating each other like shit and keeping each other down instead of enriching and uplifting each other. Blasphemous Rumours, another hard-hitting song which really made the Jesus Brigade go, what the hell? Pardon the pun. Girl of 16, whole life ahead of her, slashed her wrists, bored with life. This is a dark album. It deals with real issues. I don't want to start any blasphemous rumors, but I think that God's got a sick sense of humor. This was such a brilliant entwining of, if there is such a word, of religion, sex, domination. It's a mind-blowing record. It really is. This album received critical acclaim. Of course, it had its criticisms, but we won't focus on that. Melody Maker had some really positive things to say about it, and I quote, "They hailed Some Great Reward as a truly remarkable development in Dave Gahan's voice, concluding that while it used to be okay to slag this bunch off because of their lack of soul, their supposed synthetic appeal, their reluctance to really pack a punch, the album just trashes out bad old talk into the ground and demands that you sit up and take notice of what is happening right here under your nose." And, you know, just Google it up. There are loads of positive and negative reviews, but this really was the album that put them on the map, and people went, okay, we'll stop taking the piss out of you from now on. Where's Rick Astley? The album did receive chart positions. Of course, you can find all this information online, and it seemed to chart really well in, you know, Scandinavian countries, Germany and places like that. Depeche Mode always seems to resonate with those parts of the world. I just think it's because they've got better taste than we Brits do. Just saying. The album sales were up as well, with it going gold in Germany, silver in the UK, and receiving platinum awards in the United States. Now, the studios where they recorded this were in mainly in Hansa, but they also make reference to the Music Works in Highbury in London. Now, I don't know how much was done there, but I know that the bulk of the work and indeed the mixing were done in Hansa Studios in Berlin. Hansa has become a really iconic studio, always has been, but you know, I think this does help add to its, you know, its enigma and its the grandeur of its name. What's interesting during the production of this album as well, if you watch some documentaries, I don't know at what stage it was. I believe it was towards the end when everything was recorded. Martin, Andy, and Dave decided they're going to bugger off and go on holiday. And Alan Wilder remained in the studio with Gareth and Daniel to complete the record. And this just proves once again the dedication of Alan Wilder.
Warning! Warning! Alan Wilder, fanboy alert! Warning! Warning!
I'm allowed to speak about Alan Wilder in the context of the videos. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, Alan Wilder once again showed his dedication and commitment to the band. Right, let's have a look at some of the gear that was used in the production of Some Great Reward. I'm going to run through the list here. Once again, a lot of the same gear that was used in Construction Time Again. In what capacity these synthesizers were used, I cannot say, but I'm just going to quickly run through the list. There was once again, the Roland Jupiter 8. We see the Moog Source, the PPG Wave 2, the Roland ProMars, the Mini Moog, Yamaha CS5, the Synclavier 2, which featured very heavily on this album, the Yamaha DX7, the Tiesco 110F, RSF Cabal Expander, Oberheim OB8, and the Korg Mono Poly. Now, as I say, I don't know in what capacity these synthesizers were used. I know that the Synclavier was used a lot, as were many synthesizers from the previous albums. But just as in Construction Time Again, if we listen to, let's go back to Speak and Spell, a very keyboard sounding record, lots of played melodies, no sort of atmospheric sounds, just very honest, just bass, sequence, melody and vocal. And, you know, a very keyboard synthesizer sounding record. A Broken Frame comes along, pretty much that, a bit more gloomy, more sort of atmospheric sounds, more sort of experimentation. Construction Time Again, really where they've decided, okay, we're gonna go into the world of sampling. And by the time they get to this record, Some Great Reward, sampling was absolutely at the forefront of the creativity. And it was like every sound had to be created from scratch. And Gareth Jones talks about how he and Depeche Mode never saw samplers as, instruments or devices used to create conventional sounds. To them, it was like, well, we've got conventional sounds. We've got conventional instruments. We've got keyboards and synthesizers, and we've got all those things. But why not create music as if in a way that no one's ever heard it before, using sounds? Like just they used to go around just hitting and banging and just knocking. And there's a documentary showing Martin rolling a pebble across a balcony on the metal railings of a sliding door, and that becomes the sound on Blasphemous Rumors. So they were very, very creative, really out the box. So the theory was, why use sounds that everyone else can when you can just create your own sounds? And there are many examples of that in Construction Time Again, and especially this album, and especially in People Are People, which deserves its own video altogether. A complete rethinking of the way albums were produced. Not only did they create sounds for melodies and rhythmic parts, but they would also create their own kick and snare drums, and it was very, very creative. And I just wish I had more inside knowledge of this. Right, so we've covered the keyboards that were available. There may have been more as well. As I say, that's what was available, and this is hearsay, what was available. I tried to get these from the most reliable sources that I can, but of course, with a lot of misinformation being out there at the moment, we cannot always validate. But I try not to say things that I believe not to be true. Now, they used the drumulator, the EMU drumulator, quite a lot for bass drums and snare drum sounds. But most of the drum sounds, or a lot of the drum sounds, were sampled, and a lot of the percussion sounds were sampled into the synclavier. And as I say, there are many examples on that. But if we listen to, like, People Are People, the sound of People Are People is phenomenal, as is the sound of this record. And a lot of that was down to Gareth Jones was, I don't want to say obsessed, but he was really, really into the idea of using an acoustic space to capture a sound. So unlike popular techniques at the time, where most people, you would take your keyboard or synthesizer and you would plug it into your sequencer, record it, and that would go onto tape, and eventually, I'm just going to keep this simple. Their whole approach, Depeche Mode's whole approach, was completely out of the box. As I talked on the Construction Time Again series, a very popular thing that Gareth Jones did in the Construction Time Again, and especially in this album, was to play the synthesizers through guitar amps and to distort them, because a lot of synthesizer sounds, depending on the type of synthesizer, they can be quite clean sounding, once again depending on the synthesizer. But Gareth Jones discovered that obviously by taking the outputs of a synthesizer, putting it into a guitar amp, and then what he would do is he would hire a big PA system from a PA hire company, and they would use the sound of a room. So they would utilize and use the sound of the room. And of course, these days, and even in those days, you can record sound into your sequencer, and then you can add delay, reverb, in post-production. But Gareth Jones's approach was to use the natural sound and the echo of every room. And that's quite difficult because, when you play, and I'm getting a bit geeky now, usually what you do is you would play your keyboard or your synthesizer sound into the sequencer, and then you would add the delay and reverb afterwards. And that's easier to do because you can kind of control it. But once you've actually recorded the sound of the room, that sound is already on tape, if you know what I mean. So it's very difficult to go back and, you can't fix it, you've got to go back and redo it. And from what I can understand, this process involved a three-step or three-prong approach. And what that was using the sound from the synthesizer, just the clean sound that they had generated, and then use that sound through a guitar amp to get the distortion sound, but at the same time recorded a third time using the synthesizer played through a guitar amp through a huge PA at very high volume in a room to record the sound of the room. So you're getting the clean sound directly from the synthesizer, you're getting the distorted sound from the guitar amp, and there would be a microphone at the guitar amp. And then the third way was to get the sound from the room, and you would blend those three recordings to and that would be one part. So an incredible, a lot of attention to detail and a lot of work to go in. I don't think we realize how much work went into the production of these albums, and indeed I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in those days just to see it, because coming back to the way records are made these days, technology has made things a lot better. These days it's a lot more churn and burn. You've got to get things out quicker, so we don't actually have the time or the budgets to dedicate to making records in that way. But I have got so much respect, and a lot of my friends and producers out there who understand music production will look at this and will go, wow. Because if we look at what was available at the time, it's absolutely groundbreaking how they managed to achieve that. To sequence this album, they once again used a Roland MC4, an ARP 1600, and a BBC microcomputer UMI-2B, and sometimes they would use the sequencer within the synclavier. So a tremendously creative album and creative process and production process. Now, I gave you that complete list of synthesizers, and as I repeat, I don't know to what degree those individual synthesizers were used. I just know that they were available. But what I can tell you is that nothing here was used in a conventional kind of way. I mean, you might find like this, if we take the bass line from Lie to Me, that could have been a mini Moog. They could have probably got the deep sub sound from the mini Moog and combined it with perhaps a sound from a DX7 and then combine it with something else. I don't know, but and also, as I say, on the gear list as well, they did have a Roland TR-808, and as I said in the previous album review series, although the TR-808 was a very popular and still is these days, they didn't want people to listen to the record and go, oh, they're using a TR-808. And indeed, that is the whole fascination with Depeche Mode's records. Was at the time when they put a record out, people would go, what the hell are they using? Because it wasn't obvious what they were using, because everything was so manipulated. Nothing was used. There were no presets used. It wasn't used straight out of the box. Everything was combined with something else, manipulated, resampled, reversed, distorted, you name it. These guys were the Depeche Mode were the true pioneers of the genre. So there is so much detail that can be discussed within the production of a single album. Despite the fact that this is a two-part series, I still can only scratch the surface. The beauty of this, however, it means it opens up other topics we can talk about within an album. These album review series are meant to be general, specifically general in a way. So I go into a lot of detail, but I still feel we can go a lot deeper. But, I can't make 10-hour videos. So I think within the Geek Talk series, what I would like to do is focus on individual songs. Like take a song like People Are People, for instance, and which is a very radical track, and break it down and just really discuss the process. And I'd like to get some guest speakers in as well to help me with that. Right, so let's discuss the vocals on Some Great Reward. The vocals on this album were very good. As I said, my feelings on the vocals that Dave did on A Broken Frame, they weren't bad, but they weren't brilliant. And rumor has it that he had a cold at the time. He had the flu. Now I don't know how true that is, but I did say in the previous series that I did like Martin's voice. Martin's voice was very good on songs like Shouldn't Have Done That. And then of course we got to Construction Time again. Dave's voice was better, but I mean, by the time we get and this is the result of doing things over and over, and you could really hear the confidence in this album, and they'd really sort of come into their skin here, and they were at their peak, and they look fantastic, and the record sounds fantastic, and just the way they used to perform live in this period. I mean, I did a video on the the Live in Hamburg, and I'm going to put a link to that below so you can watch that. That was one of my favorite live performances ever. Just to get an idea of Dave sort of at his peak and his prime, check out the Live in Hamburg version. Dave had really found his voice at this point, and he was absolutely brilliant, as was Martin. Somebody also in his ballad, It Doesn't Matter. I've got no criticisms on the vocals, and it was really, really a good performance on every single song. The overall sound of this album is, I would say, hard-hitting, metallic, crunchy, and groundbreaking. This is a brilliantly mixed album. The balance, the detail, it's really like Construction Time again, it's really metallic. They definitely went for a hard kind of sound. And that's quite difficult to achieve, actually, especially in those days. I mean, even these days, to achieve this kind of sound is not easy. And I'm sure a lot of you fellow geeks out there, producers, have tried to replicate. It's not easy to get. I mean, you can put things through bit crushers and various other production techniques, but this record has a sound. It has a depth, and once again, this is something that is difficult to explain in words. It's something you can just feel, and get yourself some high definition headphones, grab a glass of red wine, and listen to this. This is a phenomenally produced album. Attention to detail is something that really jumps out at you when you listen to this. As I say, there's what we call passive listening, and I think passive listening is the way the average member of public listens to a record. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm clever now or anything else. All I'm trying to say is, and I'm sure a lot of you producers out there will agree with me when I say, I sometimes wish I could hear music the way I did before I became a producer, because I listen to things in a completely different way now. We listen more analytically, more critically. But if I can go back to the time when I heard these records before I was a producer, they blew me away. And they still blow me away now. Just listening to the definition, and as I say, attention to detail. And then within that attention to detail, it's once again knowing what was available to them at the time and how they did it. And this is just fucking brilliant. Have I not said that yet? I was reading in a Sound on Sound interview that they had with Gareth Jones. Gareth Jones does talk about how Martin, in those days, his attention to detail obviously wasn't what it is now. And of course, that's with all of us as we get older. I think Martin's whole idea was, right, there's the song, let's get this down. I don't think Martin really liked the idea of sitting for hours and hours and hours and tweaking synthesizers. And it wasn't really Dave's thing, really. And, Fletch was there to obviously make the tea, and I don't know what else he did. But so it really was up to, as far as the four members would go, it was Alan really who would always work with a producer. Then again, we've covered this in depth in many, many other videos. Flying the Alan Wilder fanboy flag again.
Warning! Warning! Alan Wilder fanboy alert! Warning! Warning!
Right, guys, and that concludes the Some Great Reward album review series, part 1. Part 2 will come out very soon. And as I say, just like with the other album review series, I will be getting my good friend, Mr. Brian Griffin, in again, and he will be discussing the artwork behind these iconic photos. And we'll speak about it in more detail when I interview Brian. But he has made these exclusive poster prints available to my channel. These are the highest resolution, most accurate reproductions of these images to be found anywhere. And if you purchase them through our channel here, Brian Griffin himself actually autographs them personally with a personal dedication of your choice. So if you want to get it for yourself, or buy it for someone as a birthday present, and you can have Dear John, kind regards, Brian Griffin, or whatever you would like him to say. But as I say, we'll be getting Brian on the next video, and we will have the second part of this album review series coming up soon. If this is the first time you've come to this channel, I would like to welcome you with open arms and say thank you. Please hit the subscribe button, and that way you can be assured of never missing a video. Click the like button and look in the description below. I'm going to link all the previous videos to these album review series I've done from the previous albums, so you can watch them there below and catch up. And to those of you, my regular subscribers, guys, I just want to say you're the best, and I'm so grateful to you for your constant support. And also reminding you guys that there is a Vaughan George Facebook group, and I'm going to place a link to the description in that below. It's a closed group, so just click on that and request to join. In this group, we really have a great bunch of like-minded people, and we discuss all the subjects that I talk about on this channel within that group. Guys, once again, I want to thank you, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Take care of yourselves.